The United States is leading a diplomatic dash to deter Israel from striking Lebanon's capital, Beirut, or major civil infrastructure in response to a deadly rocket attack on the Golan Heights. Washington is racing to avert a full-blown war between Israel and the Iranian-backed Lebanese movement Hezbollah after the attack on the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights on the weekend that killed 12 children. Israel and the US have blamed Hezbollah for the rocket strike, though the group has denied responsibility. The focus of the high-speed diplomacy is to constrain Israel's response by urging it against targeting densely populated Beirut, the southern suburbs of the city that form Hezbollah's heartland or key infrastructure like airports and bridges. Lebanon's Deputy Parliament Speaker, Elias Bousab, who says he has been in contact with US mediator Amos Hochstein since Saturday's Golan attack, has said Israel could avert the threat of major escalation by sparing the capital and its environs. If they avoid civilians and Beirut and its suburbs, then their attack could well be calculated, he said. Israeli officials have said their country wants to hurt Hezbollah but not drag the entire region into an all-out war. Israel has so far not made any commitment, though, to avoiding strikes on Beirut, its suburbs or civil infrastructure. The US State Department has said it would not comment on the specifics of diplomatic conversations, though it is seeking a durable solution to end all cross-border fire. Our support for Israel's security is ironclad and unwavering against all Iran-backed threats, including Hezbollah. That's what a spokesperson has said. However, White House spokesperson John Kirby later told reporters that Israel has every right to respond to the Golan strikes, but nobody wants a broader war. Sources say US efforts are aimed to achieve a calibrated approach similar to that which contained April's exchange of missile and drone attacks between Israel and Iran, sparked by an Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus. An Iranian official has said the United States has in fact conveyed several messages to Tehran since Saturday's attack, warning that escalating the situation would be detrimental to all parties. Now, Hezbollah is the most powerful of Iran's axis of resistance network of regional proxy groups and allied with Palestinian group Hamas. It has been trading fire with the Israeli military across Lebanon's southern border since the Gaza war erupted last October. Where is this headed? Let's put this question straight to our panel of experts. Joining me on Global Lens tonight is Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former Indian diplomat, Professor Swaran Singh, Center for International Politics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and completing the panel tonight is Irina Sukuman, National Security and Geopolitical Analyst, who joins us live from New York. A warm welcome to all my guests. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, let me begin with you. Where is this headed? Do you believe that America has really sent out an unequivocal message to Israel saying that an escalation into an all-out war is not warranted or desirable at this stage? Because on the face of it, or at least publicly, some of the utterances, including by the likes of Antony Blinken, seem to suggest Israel has the right to retaliate. What do you think is going on behind the scenes?
I think, Neha, you did the right thing in recalling what happened in April. If you remember, in April, and we had discussed it also in your show, the US had worked very hard at the back to ensure that the response would be carefully calibrated, because both sides are in a situation where they cannot lose face with their constituents. So, for instance, in April, Iran, for example, gave advance warning, and therefore the missiles did minimum damage. That is a calibrated response. In this particular case, given the complexity of the Lebanon crisis, given its long period of civil war, and the fact that it has an uneasy governance structure balanced between Christians and Muslims on one hand, and given Hezbollah's close links with Iran, which has just had a presidential election where a moderate has been elected, and given the situation in the United States, which is in the middle of a presidential campaign, I think that it makes a lot of sense for the US from the back to try to ensure a calibrated response. So the question then is, what could be a calibrated response? That would be Israel striking specific targets, but not Beirut, not populated city structures, avoiding any civilian damage, and just trying to make military bases of Hezbollah its target. This would also avoid a retaliation by Hezbollah on civilian targets deep within Israel, because in the conflict with Gaza, it has been a one-sided conflict. But if Lebanon is drawn in, it's not going to be one-sided. It would mean, first of all, Israel would have two fronts. Secondly, it would mean that the ongoing efforts by other important countries in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, etc., would get blunted because they would not want to be drawn into a regional conflict where Lebanon is involved, because many have had been to Lebanon in the past and have realized that what would be disastrous would be another civil war in Lebanon where major powers would be drawn in. It would be a power struggle. So I think that if Mr. Blinken is successful, he would be actually doing what they are saying, which is averting a major escalation, which at this point of time in international relations the region is ill-equipped to handle, and if there is a major escalation, other powers could be drawn in which case it could spread rapidly throughout the region. So I do hope that just like in April, where the situation was very tense and where it was managed with calibrated strikes and both sides informing each other in advance quietly through interlocutors that we are going to hit this target, we are going to hit that target, please make sure your civilians are out. If that kind of calibrated response is done, so that neither side loses face either, because that is also unfortunately very important these days, that nobody should lose face. If that can be arranged, then I think, Neha, we are out of a very, very tricky situation which is confronting us in this part of the world. Yeah.
No doubt about that, ma'am. We're all holding our breath and hoping and praying that this does not escalate into a full-blown war. Nobody needs that. Let me take this to Professor Swaran Singh. Professor Singh, you know, it's interesting. I read reports that when following the Saturday attack, a security cabinet meeting was held in Israel on Sunday. The two of the biggest hawks in Netanyahu's government, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, were actually absent. And that has been read by many as a sign that Israel, even if it does go ahead and retaliate, will in fact stop short of escalating this into a full-scale war. I think it can be safely stated that the United States has a clear interest right now in ensuring that there is no further escalation. We know that the Ukraine war is anyway a very unpopular one in the United States, and that country is currently facing an election and tremendous political turmoil at home. Where do you see this going?
I think the sense, Neha, I noticed that you and the ambassador who just spoke have, is that this is not likely to escalate and become an all-out war. But this is also not going to stop any soon. That's the other end of what we are looking at. At the center of this storm is Benjamin Netanyahu. And there have been several experts who have mentioned that his political career perhaps continues just as long as the war does. So some kind of continuation is likely, but it's not likely to be continued in a fashion that becomes unacceptable to United States, which is fundamentally the country which is providing both weapons and moral and political support to Netanyahu, despite all the lip service of repeatedly saying that they want to see that this comes to an end, resolved through diplomatic dialogue. But it apparently looks like the same exercise which is going on for last 10 months is likely to continue. Hezbollah has been hitting Israeli targets right from day one, which is October 8 onwards. And likewise, Israel has also been hitting various targets in south of Lebanon, assuming that they are supposed to be Hezbollah targets. And claims are that Hezbollah fighters, as many as 383 have already died, and 100 plus civilians have died in Lebanon. Sometimes because there are too many killings in Gaza, this part doesn't get quite clearly noticed. So some kind of war has already been going on. And we are looking at reports that Hezbollah has already vacated a lot of their areas in southern Lebanon where they think Israel is going to strike. So in some sense, it looks like also a bit of stage managed exercise where both sides are basically, flying rockets on each other. Here, I think military industrial complex is the ultimate profiteer. But otherwise, there's no fundamental change here. And I think what we are seeing here is all kinds of clear messages coming from all different directions. You made mention of message of the deputy speaker from Lebanon and messages going across to Iran and so on. I think it's a kind of a fixed match, as if everybody is kind of talking that it's going to be calculated strikes. It's going to be not hitting airports, bridges, or city parts of Beirut, like it happened in 2006. So, what kind of situation are we facing here? That Israel fundamentally continues that war. And, once in a while, there is a strike from either Iran or Hezbollah in Lebanon. But it's going on. That is the problem. That war is not coming to an end. And the United States apparently is not making any efforts in that direction. It makes efforts in the direction of making sure it doesn't become all-out war. But it's not either making efforts or it's not successful vis-a-vis Netanyahu. And I think in that sense, greater onus should go to where you mentioned the right-wing partners of coalition not showing up at the high security cabinet meeting. And I think internally, we have seen ministers resigning. So I think we are now likely to see greater hope being placed inside the cabinet and politics of Israel, where they would start putting some kind of expression of not being perfectly comfortable with the war continuing for 10 months and so on.
Yes.
Apparently, outside powers, France also is involved. About 20,000 French people live in Lebanon.
Yes.
They are also passing on messages between Israel and Hezbollah. But who can stop it? I think it's only inside politicians of Israel who can put a restraint on Netanyahu and tell him to now say goodbye to politics. Externally, there is no one who is able to influence it.
Okay, I'm not sure if even Biden wanted to say goodbye to politics. Many believe that the Democrats practically held a gun to his head and got him to step aside and make way for Kamala Harris. That's what politicians do, unfortunately, and it doesn't look like Netanyahu wants to pack his bags and go home anytime soon. But Netanyahu also has to realize, just how many fronts can he open? This is a war that's already been raging on for months together. Clearly, the United States also, as you said, needs to play a bigger role. Let me take this to our guest from the United States, Irina Sukuman. Irina, I think it would be pretty safe to say that both the Ukraine war and the ongoing Israel-Hamas war in Gaza are quite unpopular with very large sections of Americans. And this is a country that is facing an election less than 4 months from now. I don't think Americans have an appetite for yet another war. Therefore, there is plenty at stake here for the United States in trying to ensure that another full-blown war does not erupt in the Middle East. What do you think is happening behind the scenes? Clearly, Washington is engaged in hectic parleys as we speak to ensure the tensions are dialed down.
Well, first of all, I would say that the war in Ukraine is far less popular with far more people than Israel's self-defense war in Gaza for various reasons. But far bigger issue is the fact that most people understand that the war with Hezbollah may be a second front, but it's not a different war. It's a war. It's a strategy by Iran's axis of resistance to encircle Israel, to destroy Israel. In 2015, Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei announced a plan to destroy Israel by 2014, 25 years, and weaponizing all these proxies and isolating Israel politically and militarily is part of that plan. So Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis have been coordinating their activities. Yes, they're opening, they have new fronts, but they are not necessarily starting new or different wars. As far as the Biden administration is concerned, they're facing multiple dilemmas on multiple fronts. First of all, any sort of expansion of the conflict is going to be detrimental to the political ambitions of the Democratic Party. Any sort of escalation is seen as a sign of mismanagement of the war effort, and it will give a political advantage to Donald Trump's campaign. So that's that's the domestic angle of the situation. On a foreign policy angle, there is this concern that with more players entering the game simultaneously, there will naturally be more human victims, more chaos,
and nobody wants that. Like I said, way too many people have already died in the two wars that are already going on. Though I'm completely out of time, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, I'll give you the last word. Even as we are hoping that diplomacy succeeds here, and clearly the United States, is working the phone lines, but Netanyahu will also need to realize it at some point that Israel cannot spread itself too thin. I mean, they're already engaged in a months-long war with Hamas, and if anything, Hezbollah, if engaged with in a full-blown conflict, could actually prove to be a far bigger adversary than Hamas.
I'm afraid, Neha, that as you rightly pointed out, it's impossible to force politicians out of power. You gave a very good example with regard to Joe Biden, which I agree. Unfortunately, Netanyahu does not seem to understand that in his quest to stay in power, he is damaging Israel's capacity to fight back future conflicts on one hand, and secondly is destroying Israel's credibility as a peace-loving state surrounded by neighbors who question Israel's right to exist. This was a basic which most of Israel's friends understood clearly, including India, which has been very supportive of Israel right through. But as time goes by, as more civilian damages happen, as more dead children are buried, etc., you could see a shift of public opinion moving away from Israel. And for this, Netanyahu is responsible. If he wanted, he could have gone along with the mediators, got the hostages out, and tried to work towards some kind of a settlement, because clearly it is not possible for Israel to continue to govern indefinitely a hostile Gaza Strip. It is not possible. But Netanyahu doesn't seem to understand that. And his sentiments are not necessarily shared by everybody in Israel either. So he is actually in a situation where, unless the Israeli politicians force him out, this war will continue because it suits Netanyahu's struggle for political survival. That is very unfortunate.
It is unfortunate.
He has not put his country before his political ambitions. His political ambitions come first. That is really, really unfortunate.
I couldn't agree more with you, ma'am. I think this is really all about Netanyahu's own political survival, and way too many people have paid a very heavy price just for Netanyahu's own political ambitions. How much longer can this go on for? Well, we'll wait to see, but let's certainly keep our fingers crossed and hope that this matter is de-escalated at the earliest with the intervention of the United States, if that's what it takes. On that note, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, Professor Swaran Singh, Irina Sukuman, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens.